A small but committed group representing diverse stakeholders are currently working to increase the use of controlled burning or prescribed fire as a management tool. Seasonal controlled burning provides many benefits at a low cost. From a biodiversity conservation standpoint, fire maintains habitats, supporting the many varieties of flora and fauna we see in this area today. It promotes the health and abundance of valued natural and cultural resources and can protect communities from extreme wildfires.
Working together at the community scale to reinitiate the purpose of humans and fire in that relationship is something that has to be done by the people who are going to be here for a long time. Because in order to truly understand and learn from what you're doing, it has to become an intergenerational process.
You know, the people that live in these communities today, whether they're native or non-native, have a commitment to this place. Maybe they actually think they own something here. Maybe they paid money and purchased a piece of land. You know, nobody really owns anything. What you own is a responsibility.
One group that has taken on this responsibility is the Orleans-Somes-Bar Fire Safe Council.
The Orleans-Somes-Bar Fire Safe Council was formed in 2001 following the passage of the National Fire Plan. I was coming out of Humboldt State University at that time and looking for a way to make a difference back here in the Salmon River, Mid-Klamath area, and realized this opportunity for us to organize around fire issues as a community. So after several community meetings in 2001, we decided to formalize ourselves with a mission statement and a strategic plan for primarily protecting communities from the threat of wildfire, but also wrapped up in our mission statement was the understanding that that is tied to restoring historic fire regimes.
The planning area of the Fire Safe Council is primarily national forest lands, including 8,000 acres of private land along the middle section of the Klamath River. This area is within the Aboriginal territory of the Karuk Tribe.
Really what kind of was the catalyst to our prescribed burning program was the science that came out and showed that a lot of home ignitions were happening after the flaming front had passed, and it was the creeping ground fire coming along in the duff that caught onto the siding that actually ignited the structure. And so right away, we were treating fuels for a couple years. We could go back and look at those fuel breaks and see that a lot of our work was already being covered up by regrowth. And so that's what originally got us into looking at prescribed burning, was maintaining our fuel breaks so that they would function as fuel breaks in wildfires.
I see the merit of fuel breaks, but not to put fires out, not to stop wildfire, but to put fires in, to start prescribed fire, or to manage wildfire with fire use. And the kind of fuel break it takes to start fires under the best of conditions for doing that and controlling it is less harsh on the forest than the kinds of fuel breaks to stop a wildfire under the worst of conditions.
In the 7 years that we've been burning, we've accomplished about 400 acres. We're not even burning a tenth of what we should ecologically be burning in a year.
The Fire Safe Council estimates this burning on private lands would cost approximately $320,000 per year. These costs would go down over time once the initial fuel buildup was dealt with.
Evidence is that for each dollar you spend preparing for fire, either doing fire management planning or some kind of pre-fire fuels or vegetation treatments, you save about $7 or more in fire suppression. So, you know, we're spending our money at the wrong end of this situation. We should be spending more on the front end, helping homeowners prepare their homes for fire, because we know it's going to happen.
Perry Daniels and Petey Brucker are active members of their local fire-safe councils. Both use controlled burns regularly to protect their homes from wildfires.
When you live in a urban area, seeing smoke on the hillsides is always alarming. And when you move up here to the country, when you're living on a wood pile, and you start lighting things on fire, you do feel a little apprehension. It was quite an adrenaline rush when we first started burning here. I'm a little more used to it now. I'm much more comfortable with it, and I realize that, you know, it's something that we need to do. If we want this property to survive a wildfire coming through, we have to put fire on the ground here.
I remember one time when we first had our first fuels reduction project down here in '94, getting rid of the fuels all around there and down by the mailbox down there. We had gotten rid of it. And we worked for about 4 hours, actually. Worked for about 4 hours. We were getting rid of the fuels, and we got about half an acre. So we went for lunch, and I said, hey, guys, check it out. And there were 8 of us. It was really good. You know, it was spring. So I just lit off. A couple sections. Sure enough, in half an hour, did better work than we did in 4 hours.
Right now we're going into places that haven't seen fire in 100 years and having to do an extreme amount of fuels reduction. There's a lot of ground litter. There's, you know, 1.5 foot thick duff layers in some areas, so we have to be extra careful.
The problem we have right now, we've excluded fire from the ecosystem for so long that we need to put fire back into it, low intensity for the first entrance. And most burn managers go out there and burn the area one time. Okay, we got that done, and then they're gonna wait another 100 years, which you just lost the reason you needed to put fire in there in the first place. You've got to follow up that burn with another burn. You know, if the area was, fire history was every 8 years, maybe you need to come back in there on the second burn 3 years later to clean up a lot of the dead stuff that you killed the first time, and then come back in 10 years after that. And that's when you're going to see some changes on the ground, is after that third burn.
These burns address the need for mixed severity fire to maintain ecological function.
Well, I think for a healthy ecosystem, you've got to blow some holes in that canopy. You've got to get some diversity in your vegetation, which means old growth versus new growth. You've got to have some brush component and grass for the species that rely on that.
Areas to reintroduce prescribed fire on the landscape, those areas that burned in 2008, the adjacent unburned areas are a perfect opportunity to do that.
Some places probably have been reset to square one. Other places, the stage has been set to reset to square one in the next fire. If we wait till 2020 to go into those tan oak stands that burned in 2008, many of those are going to reset to brush.
You know, we could retrace these big fire years, and you think about what to do with these landscapes now. And I think in the past, the direction that's been taken is, well, we'll plant these forests, and I think that's I think in a lot of cases that's a knee-jerk response. That that's not the strategy. The better strategy, and I think this gets back to the idea of prescribed fire, is that you embrace the disturbance of the landscape. You embrace the landscape. The landscape is going to burn, and so how might we design vegetation that can tolerate fire?
Methods for reinstating historic fire regimes have come from the Karuk Tribe, whose experience burning on this landscape for thousands of years is invaluable to community members.
Ever since our formation, we've worked closely with the tribe to identify not just the areas that needed to be treated, but what types of treatments were specific to that vegetation type, to that slope, to that aspect, and more importantly, what types of ecological processes were we affecting, and what were the species that we might be impacting by implementing prescribed burns in different seasons.
All the tribal perspective is based on a long history of science and this understanding that all things in this universe are connected. We have ceremonies that we practice, yes. What are those ceremonies based on? They're not based on some, far out weird concepts. They're based on survival in this place.
I believe it was 1911, the last time Off-Field Mountain was burned as part of the World Renewal ceremonies. When you look at that corner of the landscape and you look at if that was burned every year, then there's a large area where private residents today wouldn't have to worry about a threat of fire coming from the Marble Mountain Wilderness in July.
You know, we have to work within this landscape. This landscape has to produce what we need it to produce so we can survive, so our children and grandchildren can survive and subsist here in a sustainable fashion.
Northwest California is known for its basketry. We're world renowned for our basketry. And our knowledge of the plants and the fact that we have been here forever. We have always been here. And we will always be here. The fact that I'm sitting here talking to you right now is a testament to that because of what our people have gone through.
Our knowledge of this landscape and the management practices that are tailored, that have been used for thousands of years, evolved from this place right here. Not someplace else, from this place.
You can manipulate the vegetation to provide what you want and discourage what you don't want by setting those fires at different times of the year and different intensities. What I brought to show you right here is some really nice sticks. These are hazel sticks. And these are what we've gotten from burned areas. When you have a hazel plant, for example, and it grows and it grows, it just turns into a great big bush that's very unmanageable. If it was burned in the fall, back down to the base, what would come up in the spring would be these nice straight shoots. And I would be going and gathering those nice straight shoots. If it's not burned, it will always have these little side shoots that I can do nothing with. I cannot weave with things like that.
The Karuk also use fire to reduce fuels in tan oak acorn gathering areas. Cultural burns in tan oak stands kill young fir trees that would eventually overtop the tan oaks in the absence of fire. These fires create clear understories that promote gathering, protect fire-sensitive tan oak trees from wildfires, and produce an abundance of high-quality acorns. Heat and smoke from these fires interrupt the life cycle of weevils and other pathogens that infect the acorns.
The people nowadays, we pick a lot of acorns, both for ceremony, but the older people, when they get sick and they can't eat anything, first thing they start asking for is acorns and deer meat and salmon. So they go back to their foods that they ate when they were younger, but foods that are nutritious. I can still go pick acorns from my great-grandmother's tree. I know where it's at. And a lot of people can't say that.
There's kind of like two principles that I always come back to in talking about these things. One is that when we talk about forest ecology and fire ecology, that it's a science of place, that the problems aren't the same everywhere and the solutions aren't the same in every place. Depends on what forest type that you're in. The second principle is that the only constant is change, which means that forests are going to change with or without disturbance. Fire is going to be there whether you like it or whether you don't like it. And so you're going to have to live with the fact that fire is a part of the social environment as well as the natural environment.
I think there are lots of opportunities in northwestern California to use prescribed fire. One of those clearly is in oak woodlands and grasslands. These are areas that burn from lightning ignitions. They burned a lot from tribal ignitions, and they have, in many cases, have been burned quite a bit by federal and state agencies and just local private landowners who were interested in keeping these woodlands open.
John McClelland has been the prescribed fire technician for Redwood National Park since 1985. His career began when the park started managing the Bald Hills with prescribed fire, after realizing these oak woodlands and grasslands needed fire to persist on the landscape.
What's really cool after we burn is, if it's a late season burn, if there's already moisture in the ground, is within 3 or 4 days after the burn, you get a nice regrowth coming up of young grass. And then you'll see the elk move right in to the grasslands, and it's pretty cool to see, wildlife utilize an area that was just burned. And again, that kind of ties in the whole historic role of Native Americans utilizing fire as a tool. They certainly wanted to perpetuate elk and deer and as a food source, and they recognized that fire was a great way to do that. You burn off the dry grass, it rains, and immediately, you have the green grass coming up through. You got the oak seedlings that then drop, a great food source for the wildlife, and it's a great thing to see. These low intensity burns, it burns through, and then it basically leaves the root system and the base of the plant intact, so it can just resprout and come back. So it's pretty neat to see. Most of the large legacy oaks all have fire scars, from repeated burning. One of the objectives is to kill Douglas fir, young Douglas fir seedlings, 3 feet and lower in open grasslands.
The Forest Service has been a little slower to think about ecosystem restoration, think about biodiversity conservation. They have been discussing it in words, but I think as they apply it in the landscape, I think they've been a little bit slower.
Modern forest management is still driven primarily by economics and is based on the European view of the forest as either a wilderness not to be touched or as a resource to generate profit.
And the longer we go without treating areas with fire, the longer we go without burning areas, the more complex the whole enterprise becomes. I think that's part of it too. They've built a landscape that's a little bit harder to burn sometimes. I'm very optimistic for the Forest Service.
In the spring of 2012, the Happy Camp Ranger District, with the support of tribal fire crews and local contractors, implemented a series of prescribed burns around the town of Happy Camp to protect the community from future wildfires.
We just completed about 440 acres on this one unit. We've been burning since Monday afternoon. The resources, we've had 3-4 crews, 3 to 5 engines and miscellaneous overhead on the fire. We staffed the fire 24 hours a day. We had folks working all night long on this to make sure everything went real smooth. And we wanted to make sure that the town people, the community, knew that we were doing this safe and that, it's going to do some good things.
A few months after this burn, a large lightning storm in the middle of fire season produced several lightning strikes that hit snags within this burn area. Because the ground fuels were already consumed, these fires put themselves out.
The Shasta Trinity has a proposal to treat some strategic ridge lines in the Trinity Alps with prescribed fire. Some of these strategic ridge lines that might routinely be used for trying to hold wildfires in the future.
During the suppression of the 2009 Backbone Fire, tribes and forest supervisors discussed the need to use controlled burns to restore high country ridge systems as landscape level fuel breaks.
This idea of aerial ignitions along ridge tops late in the season, makes a lot of sense.
Putting fire on our ridge systems in the fall after the peak of fire season, I think, is one way that we can very cheaply and efficiently and quickly build some resiliency to the megafires that we're likely to see in a climate.